Hello everyone. The 4.7 beta cycle has been, to put it in a single word, weird. Likely because of holidays in China, the beta news for this patch's characters have been delayed, released on weird times, and quite sparse in general. There really hasn't been many kit updates this time around. However, I think we finally got the last kit changes for Clorinde, Sigewinne, and Sethos. And although these were overall small updates such as changes to number values, some of the kit changes are quite significant, so I wanted to quickly cover these changes in this video. First, let's cover what changed about Clorinde, the character that got the most recent and controversial update. Her kit just got 2 number values changed, but this change actually quite significantly affects her kit's overall strength, and unfortunately it's not in a positive way. The 2 changes are to her skill, and remember that her skill enhances her attacks and is pretty much the majority of her kit. The main nerf that was added was that Clorinde's enhanced state when you first press the skill was reduced from 9 seconds to 7.5 seconds. Now, due to hit lag, the skill doesn't actually last 7.5 seconds, it lasts a bit longer, but nevertheless, her enhanced state time was reduced by 1.5 seconds. To kind of compensate this, her level 3 lunge attack was increased from 46.2% times 3 hits to 49.6% times 3 hits at talent level 10. This compensation is pretty insignificant, so the biggest hit is the decreased duration in Clorinde's enhanced state. The old assumption was that she would be able to fit 6 and 3Es. Now, the new assumption that most theory crafters are going with their calculations is that she can only fit 5 and 3Es, so she loses 1 and 3E. Now, obviously, one less combo means Clorinde is doing less damage in a rotation. However, I want to shift the focus a little away from damage and more towards how this change affects her overall gameplay in a rotation. And through this, we'll see why decreasing her enhanced state by 1.5 seconds negatively impacts Clorinde. So the normal rotation pre-nerf for pretty much all of Clorinde's teams, such as Aggravate and Overload, was that you would set up your support skills first, then you switch to Clorinde, burst if you had it, skill to enter her enhanced state, skill again because if you used your burst you would have enough bond of life to use your level 3 lunge attack, then you would do 6 and 3Es before swapping back to your supports and looping the rotation. With this most recent nerf, you can only do 5 and 3Es like I said, but by ending her enhanced state earlier now, you need to spend more time on your supports since her skill cooldown wasn't touched. The problem is that we don't need this extra time to reset up our support skills again, and you're going to have extra downtime. For instance, in an Aggravate team with Nahida, Fischl, and Kazuha, post-nerf, after you on-field with Clorinde and you reapply Nahida's skill and potentially burst, recast Oz, and re-swirl Electro with Kazuha, once you switch back to Clorinde to re-loop the rotation and on-field with her again, her skill can still be on cooldown, so you won't be able to enter her enhanced state for the second rotation again. Pre-nerf, this wouldn't be an issue because you spent more time on-fielding because it lasted longer. So now you have to find a way to fill in that downtime, such as, I don't know, autoing on Nahida for a short period to get some spreads or something. Now this isn't too bad damage-wise, but ultimately having this extra downtime instead of a smooth rotation is going to make Clorinde more awkward to play if you plan to play her correctly, such as looping a rotation. And having to fill in this empty downtime is likely to lead to an overall lower damage per rotation compared to pre-nerf. This rotation is still perfectly fine for if you're planning to use the Bond of Life artifact set. However, you can choose to smoothen out Clorinde's rotation by fitting in 2 Clorinde skills into a 25 to 26 second rotation by utilizing the 4-piece Thundering Fury to lower her skill cooldown. I've outlined a simplified version of the rotation when using 4-piece TF on the screen. However, keep in mind that there may be some specific skill orders that you should do in certain teams to really take advantage of this change in rotation. But ultimately, 4-piece TF is going to allow you to play Clorinde with a more smooth rotation, allowing for more gameplay comfort. Now keep in mind, however, that this artifact set does not maximize Clorinde's personal DPS. Both non-TF and TF playstyles are fine. However, I do think that with this change, TF is definitely more incentivized just to fix her potential gameplay awkwardness that this change introduces. Now, what does this mean for Clorinde's overall strength? Simply put, she's pretty much on the same power level as Raiden at all levels of investment until you get to C6 where Clorinde gets much better. But other than that, Clorinde is just a Raiden alternative. If you can just imagine Raiden in Overload and Aggravate, if you just plop in Clorinde, she'll pretty much perform about the same. Does that make her a weak character? No, she's still a solid DPS. But at C0 as an Electro on-fielder, she's not going to hit the high highs of other DPSs like Arlecchino that were recently released. Next, let's move on to the Sigewinne updates. And she got a nice buff to her A1 passive. This is the passive that buffed the damage of off-field elemental skill damage such as Fischl and Farina skills in a similar way to Shenhe's Icy Quills. This damage buff was just increased, so that's pretty nice. It increased from 65 to 80 per 1000 HP, and now the max amount of damage bonus that you can get per hit is now 2800. Notably, the HP needed to max out her buff is now increased to 65,000 HP. Definitely doable, but you'll have to full focus on HP on your artifacts and weapon choice. Her C1 and C6 were also changed. For her C1, they literally just added an entire A1 passive buff to her C1, increasing her damage buffing capability. And for her C6, they just changed the numbers around on the amount of crit rate and crit damage you get, but nothing too impactful. The last thing I want to point out is that originally I assumed that Sigewinne had pretty bad hydro application, applying hydro only once on both her skill and her burst. However, we now know that it's a little better now. Notably, her bubble from her skill can apply hydro every 2 seconds, and since it takes a while to bounce, it will generally apply hydro around 2 to 3 times off field, depending on where the enemies are. So what does this buff mean for Sigewinne's overall strength? I know there were a lot of Daya memes around here saying that she was extremely weak, but after thinking about it and with these changes, I've ultimately come to realize that Sigewinne is primarily a comfort character at C0. Her damage buff is nice, and she's a pretty strong choice when paired with Furina, as Sigewinne heals a lot, so you're able to maximize her fanfare stacks with Furina, and combined with the clam set, she can provide even more damage. And keep in mind, if you are pairing Sigewinne with Furina, Sigewinne's relatively low hydro application doesn't really matter too much anymore because Furina is providing hydro application for you. So she does have her place in teams and can easily keep your team healthy, acting as a sort of Kokomi alternative. However, like I said, this is more of a comfort choice rather than this character is the absolute best in a single team if you're trying to optimize. So whether or not this makes her a valuable pull or not is up to you. Lastly, Sethos got some nice buffs. First, in terms of a normal attacking playstyle with his burst, the EM multiplier of each of his enhanced normal attacks was increased from 307% EM to 353.1% EM at talent level 10. Assuming a rotation of 3 N3s and an N2, this buff adds about a 700% EM multiplier to that rotation, which is nice. In addition, his A4 passive was buffed, which increases the EM multiplier of up to 4 of his charge attacks. The most recent change adds an extra 100% EM multiplier to each of his 4 charge attacks. Again, nice buff. Ultimately, however, Sethos is still a 4-star and does do 4-star levels of damage, so the buffs don't drastically change his overall strength. As a 4-star, he's decent, but nothing crazy or special, especially when considering the other 5-star DPSs in this game. So those were all the recent kit updates for the 4.7 characters, and they are likely the last changes, so the kits are pretty much finalized. In terms of Sigewinne and Sethos, I'm glad they got buffed, they definitely needed it. Hoyo likes to keep 4-star DPSs in check, so I don't have that many expectations for Sethos. Hopefully he's fun and does enough practical damage in Abyss to be usable. With Sigewinne, she has a nice damage buff for off-field elemental skill damage, and when paired with Furina, which can actually take advantage of this buff, she has good synergy, and her relatively low hydro up isn't a problem anymore. Her biggest strength is that she has a lot of healing, giving players a lot of comfort, and when paired with Furina, lots of fanfare stacks. She has her place in teams, but unfortunately she doesn't really bring anything too new in terms of hydro supports, as Kokomi does a similar job as her. So she's looking to mainly be another comfy healer alternative, which is something that players are looking for. Lastly, with the Clorinde changes, I have absolutely no idea why Hoyo decided to nerf her enhanced state duration. She was already pretty balanced in terms of damage before, maybe you could argue above average, and although her overall strength is still relatively the same now, this nerf ultimately makes her rotations more awkward to potentially play. So what was Hoyo's intention with this change? At the current moment, 4-piece TF looks like a very enticing option just to make Clorinde's rotation feel more smooth to play, which seems weird when there's a Bond of Life set that was just released, so you would think Hoyo would push more players to farm that new set. It's just a little bit disappointing because Clorinde definitely had room to just deal more damage, so I'm surprised that Hoyo is being so conservative with balancing her kit. And unfortunately, this change just serves to make her quality of life worse. Is she a still strong DPS? Like I said, yes, I think she's fine, but does her kit balance need to be this conservative, especially when taking into account other Fontaine DPSs that were released? I personally don't think so. I hope this video was able to help you guys better understand the beta changes that the 4.7 characters have received over these past few weeks. Don't be afraid to leave a like, comment, or subscribe if you enjoyed, it really helps me out a ton. And with that, I have nothing else to say, so I hope you all have a wonderful day.